Welcome to Conscious Dominance, a Dsrx studio production. These weekly conversations explore how to approach mindful leadership and inner dominance within the powerful container of committed, intentional relationships. Join Eric as he invites new dialogues, sharing practical insights for how the craft of consciousness opens the aperture to love, serve, and connect with unwavering presence.
Welcome to Conscious Dominance. This is Eric. If you've been with us throughout this last year and previous seasons, you've surely heard me speak, briefly at least, about the concept of Dsrx. Today I'm here with my bride, Rachael, and we're going to speak at length specifically about Dsrx and what that means as a relationship concept. Dsrx emerged from our relationship, emerged from my frustration. And when Rachael and I first came together, we found ourselves naturally falling into what in many ways looked like a very traditional dominant submissive dynamic. As you've heard on these previous episodes, the traditional DS was deeply woven into both of our previous relationships and very much in various stages of intentionality. Something, though, happened that was very profound when we came together, and Rachael provided so much love, comfort, safety for me in a container that I had never experienced. I was able to let go, and in that state of vulnerability and letting go, there was a dissolving that took place in my psyche, a great healing. And as that happened, our roles shifted, and I couldn't be in a state of healing and maintain the dominant role in the relationship. And so it was very natural for Rachael to just pick up and care for me from a place of deep love, devotion, and she quietly guided me. She by no means dominated or was out of her feminine element. She was offering a spaciousness for me to find my self-dominance, to reboot, essentially. And this experience really challenged the way I had thought about and knew about a traditional DS dynamic. We realized that this original framework of the dominance and submission wasn't capturing the full complexity. It didn't really get at the totality of what was happening between us and how our roles would dissolve and reform in unexpected ways and yet necessary ways.
So many of our conversations and walks around the neighborhood and various meals where we just shared so much discourse and exploration mentally and spiritually in an embodied way about how we are in an active process of reframing the traditional DS dynamic from that dominance and submission into what we found to be more accurate for us at the time, using these terms of devotion and service and also discipline and softness as a new definition of what D and S, the two letters, stand for. And the RX then came in with this dual significance to round out the term DSRX, where the first meaning really comes from a pharmacy or a prescription, where that RX is that trusted place that you go for care or for healing. And the second piece of that dual meaning comes from astrology, where the RX is a retrograde period, an essential period where the planets actually appear to move backwards and ask us to reflect and reset, and many other words that begin with the prefix re. So together, those meanings actually create a very powerful framework or an architecture for us to understand relationships in a cycle, and that we can see that especially during our inevitable challenging periods that can happen daily or weekly or monthly, or even in bigger arcs throughout the cycles or rhythms inside of the way that we want to relate to each other and to our world and to our personal exploration, become setbacks. But those setbacks are actually essential for growth, for our growth, but also something Eric's talked about so much in this podcast is how challenge can be reframed to see how much it is imperative for our expansion as beings.
Yeah, and I love what you just said there too, because I see that the metaphor of the retrograde with the planets, it speaks to the fact that it's part of what is natural. This is not like a deviation from what's natural, and it's just a better understanding of growth. And I love the idea as you think about the planets moving around the solar system as this big sweeping curve orbiting, and they orbit at different speeds and in different trajectories. And when you're on Earth, which is also orbiting, and Mercury, for example, comes back around, there's a certain point where when it's in its orbit and when you're looking at Earth, it appears like it's going backwards and it appears to be slowing down. But in fact, it's still in its natural order, and it betrays the bold, confident, direct line that is such the necessary way that we think that life is. We think that it's got to be this direct, bold, clear thing, and then all of a sudden there's this moment where in your trajectory, it's like there's a pause, and things seem to be challenging in that moment. And then if you're paying attention, it really feels like you're going backwards. And it's actually just like with the retrograde, it's a natural geometry of growth. And what appears as a retreat or a backwards motion is really just the necessary completion of the growth arc. And this apparent place of reversal often induces kind of like a panic state, a downright traumatic state for especially men.
A lot of judgment.
A lot of judgment. And just to keep remembering it's not problem. And I think getting away from that, and I think especially for men, we're so conditioned to think that the path is a straight line, to see success as a step-by-step journey where progress is measured by money, by metrics, by where we fit in the hierarchy. And unless we are meeting those metrics, we don't feel good about ourselves. And it's something that I definitely struggle with and have struggled with, it feeling worthy because I'm out of step or I'm dealing with some injury. And when I'm not able to climb the ladder of success or scale the staircase, there's a period there where the RX comes alive. And that's what we're speaking about. It's this period that's actually at its basic is rest. It's actually a stopping, and it's where you're asked to take life moment to moment. And Brad Stolberg, who I mentioned on this podcast, written this great book, Master of Change. He speaks about this notion of work plus rest equaling progress. And I love that. It's important to recognize that this space of rest is a place of these rewords of the retrograde, of reassessing, of reorganizing, of rehabilitating, of reordering, and recognizing like a recognition, a new learning and a new path, and ultimately a repair.
The repair is really where the retrograde begins. And as we're seeing, this optical illusion is where the planet appears to actually move backwards through the sky, not as a detour, but as the path itself. And just as the planets don't actually reverse course, they're simply moving through a different part of their natural orbit. These moments for us of apparent regression are that essential part of forward motion. There's so many examples of this in our interpersonal lives. But unfortunately, these retrograde or RX periods are often judged in our culture and society, that we can have so many personal opinions and get caught in the sort of drama or the storytelling that this is detrimental, especially for men and those holding more masculine in their structure or practice. We're taught to think that that's wrong or bad or weak to slow down or to reassess. But when we see things not so linearly and really accept that life is more cyclical and irregular, and that is something that we work with, just like your feminine beings are weather-like and chaos and dynamic in nature, that we're working with that energy instead of trying to force it to do unsuccessfully force it
Mm-hmm.
into something that is false.
Mm-hmm.
So that symbol RX carries centuries of healing wisdom there.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and mention that the symbol RX is derived from the Latin word recipe, meaning to take, and it's the medieval physicians' instructions to the apothecaries. They were marked by a line through the right foot of the letter R. And
To take, to ingest.
to ingest, yes. So it was like telling, it was a prescription. Here, this is what you need to do, and the recipe is really, here's what you need to do, and it's a way to move through the healing process. And I think that's, yeah, I found that really cool. And
I know it also has a trace back to the Jupiter's astrological sign that's placed on that prescription to invoke a divine blessing, and that it also is part of that evolution from the Eye of Horus, the Egyptian symbol for healing. And so at Dsrx, we weave that all together to have these ancient threads of healing, that this prefix of re, as in retrograde, is significant too, because it means again or to come back. And so the periods where we begin again or come back is really a time to study or to tap into other words that begin with the prefix re. And I've said to clients and friends to go grab a thesaurus when we're recognizing that we're in these periods, and actually grab words that actually resonate with what you're going through, to just remember that this is where we are. So those words can be about rethinking and rewriting and renewing and redoing, to reconsider or to rewire or to revisit, to revise, as if we're writing a plan. And what other ones can you think of? To
repeat,
retrace, to
replay.
replay
Yeah.
is good, because
Yeah.
it is a rewind
Mm-hmm.
to look backwards,
Mm-hmm.
to refresh, to reverse,
Mm-hmm.
to remember, as I said before, to
Mm-hmm.
remember, to bring yourself back into wholeness. So that RX and the DSRX really represents a process for conscious repair. The repair is coming back to being a pair, not just fixing what's broken, but actually returning to unity, restoring wholeness, that integrity, the integer, the integrity after an experience of separation. And that goes with you with Source, with God, the universe, and you with your partner, who we're in this dynamic experience with. So, like any sacred space of an ancient apothecary, DSRX really offers a place to retreat and embrace rest as part of the process, part of the medicine, if you will. There's a suggested recipe, which I love when you say the Greek word, that it's to take, to ingest, to bring it into your body, the recipe from which to adapt, to balance a precise dosage. And we talk about that word a lot inside of our private life, these intentional rhythms and these cyclical steps that we're working with nature in that way, my nature, Eric's nature, with these carefully chosen ingredients. And some of those ingredients include discomfort, and they include a total death and rebirth process. That's where the dosage is so important, because some of those ingredients can be toxic when in great measure, or when not balanced with.
Or not in a container, or not with intentionality.
Exactly.
Right. And I think it really comes back to this need to redefine what it is that DS, and move away from a paradigm that is pure growth, pure dominant submission, this sort of binary, linear model, that we have to redefine and be more inclusive and more complex and more reflective of what nature is. In many ways, DSRX is similar to the rhythm of nature. And when I was pondering this and bringing this to Rachael, she got excited as I introduced her. I was like, I really feel like there's a need to redefine this. We need to move past just pure dominance and submission. There's other things happening here.
Which we appreciate, but feels
Incomplete.
feels incomplete.
Yeah.
And there's just, it's the beginning. It's the beginning, like any start
And
of a journey.
and we come back to it. It's not like we leave it and never come back. It's a wonderful part of
It's fun.
It's fun. So the devotion became this word that you brought up, and service, devotion and service.
DS.
DS. And at first, I resisted that when you brought it to me. I have to say that it took me a moment to get out of the paradigm of judging those words as too feminine, too weak, that I couldn't embrace them as a sense of what I was about and what I was doing. And I was still very much caught in an old paradigm. And I wanted to be the man, the leader, be in control, to be stud at all times. And that if I was in any way outside of that, I was so judgmental of it, and I didn't value what I was doing there. And what I came to realize, and what you helped me realize, is there's nothing more powerful than being in devotion and being in service. And that actually that's a place that we can perpetually be, even when we're in a resting place.
Well
And
said.
so it's very sustainable. And so, yes, the podcast is called Conscious Dominance, but to me, it's about consciously redefining and challenging what the notion of dominance means, where I put the word conscious in front of it and define it, yes, as inner dominance, as leadership, as being in my authority, in being but ultimately it's my authority over myself. And it's about embracing an ethic of valor, which is wonderfully defined by Richard Rudd in Gene Key 21 as courage and love. And the old model of DS, which is this very much a power over, this includes this at times, but is sustainable in it being always a power with. And yes, there's still hierarchy, but it's a different kind of hierarchy. It's a hierarchy that reflects my alignment with source, or my alignment with truth, or my alignment with God, something that's beyond just my own personal power. And when I'm in that alignment, there's a natural flow. And it is a state of hierarchy, and that is where I want to be. But it's in accord, and it's not about forcing submission. It's about creating a container, creating a space, creating a way for the surrender to feel completely natural, to feel completely safe.
And that surrender is shared between the two of us. It's not just me in a state of surrender, that any person who's holding either side or all sides of the relating sphere is in a consistent awareness of the state of surrender, that it's within and around us. And to me, there is no reality that feels good or feels right or true except to be in a devotional stance, in my devotional exploration. That is my natural state. And in Dsrx, both partners, both of us, are embodying this devotional stance from a deep, deep place of reverence and care, but also how that is expressed through service, and how service is expressed through devotion itself. So they fold in on each other. I am in devotion, Eric is in devotion, Eric is in service, I am in service. So this dynamic flow of power comes from this moment-to-moment aliveness that we feel to ensure that we're caring for each other's nervous systems in a deep way, and that we can't fuck this up. We are just here to be able to be in a deeper state of that bigger space of devotion, which feels beyond the human and beyond the nervous system, while also being in great care and service of our nervous systems. That's the caretaking that is really there. It doesn't feel like submission or surrender in any kind of traditional sense. It feels relaxed. It feels like ease. It feels like certainty. It feels like flow. And that feeling is that everything is working out. And that because we're so natural, it's easeful. My natural state is relaxed. Most of the day I do work laying down. I'm always prostrate or in some sort of prone position, lounging and enjoying myself. That is ultimately what makes me be in this highly receptive state, but not only in my physical postures, but also in the way that I open my heart. And I see Eric in those ways of finding how his relaxation and the way that he is in service to us, how we arrive at a hotel, and how he's relaxed and easeful and gentle and devotional in the way that he unpacks the car, loads everything up, unpacks our room, gets everything set. It's very technical. It's a lot of physical labor. And I am, meanwhile, flowing in my way, carrying up a beverage and having a great shower and relaxing while he does a lot of the thinking and a lot of this process in a natural way. That's how this dynamic helps us both be in a space of relaxation, of devotion, of service, and even in receptivity, although that's where I feel that my best interests ultimately are considered, and not just considered, but prioritized. And I think that that place of how I've learned over the years to be receiving with this much volume, as in
You're really good at
mass,
receiving.
have practiced.
I was thinking about recently I had a birthday, and birthdays bring up a lot for me in that it's hard for me to receive.
Yeah, it's hard for a lot of people to receive. And I think over the years, just witnessing the various ways that we may even feel into birthdays have their own story, but we can think of the many ways that someone simply just receives a compliment at a grocery store, and how interesting that dynamic is for us to say, oh, I love your nails. It's the common one for me because I love people's fingernail art. And I'll say that, and some people really take that in. You can feel that they fully let that absorb into them, where other people have a kind of way of rejecting it, pushing it over, or immediately pointing out the flaw, whatever that may be. So that receptivity and the practice of that can live in all kinds of places. But I think with birthdays, it's especially been alive inside of some of the Q&A spaces at Arosha lately, and many conversations that people have been requesting and asking how to better manage the way that they project into the space, but also to receive or give structure to it. And I think it's interesting because when Eric and I first got together, we were distanced, and it was my greatest focus for about 60 days before his birthday to curate and play with how I could make things and draw things and write love notes. And I had to mail it many weeks ahead because the mail is squirrely where he used to live. And it was a whole process. I've always been a birthday person. I love celebrating birthdays. I love being celebrated. And so really thinking about the many ways I've curated and hosted and really just spent countless hours and days with huge events and surprises, and that's for people I sometimes barely even knew. Contrasted by when we continued to get to know each other and to be in person, it was an interesting dynamic to start to feel in my body my desire to exalt him and celebrate him and love on him, treat him, and just shower him with everything, every creative idea I could possibly do. But after practicing the natural rhythm of Eric, who makes decisions, makes reservations, makes technical experiences feel so easy, I've been in the practice of that my whole life. And it's less about that I was out of practice, but more that it didn't feel true. It felt a little uncomfortable, partially because he wasn't going to be in a pure receptive state, but also because it felt tiring to me. And to be just honest with myself, that all the previous years of my life were planning and executing a plan and being in great structure and creativity was fun for me. I was unaware how fun and tiring and depleting it also was. And so to see that and sort of feel what I remember even speaking to our friends Andrew and Dawn about, it felt like a glitching. And I was like, I kept trying to do it, and it's like the world would dissolve in front of my eyes. And he was unsure about receiving. I was unsure about leading. And it was like just for a day or 2 days that we were celebrating this, and it just was grindy in not a pleasurable way. So we eventually have been practicing with both of our birthdays and with other dates where a moment may exist where I can really, and truly it was coming into the definition of Dsrx that helped me. Am I in my overflow? I'm not without service in this relationship. It just looks and feels different for me than it does for Eric. And so for me to find my own signature scent or a signature feeling of what service
No obligation.
executed feels like, and it feels devotional. If I'm in that space of dear, tender reverence while I am walking across the room, while I am preparing a meal, or while I am making a decision, a simple decision. Am I laying down? Am I in my postures that keep me soft? Is my breath easy? Even if he's not in the room, it's my discipline to be able to really be true to my energy. And the minute I would start to feel myself tense or get into rigidity or frustration or overwhelm, to simply inform him and to come back to a space of, I need your help. I need your guidance. Be with me with this so that I could stay devoted to devotion itself, to love itself, and ultimately to successfully have the most successful we have had to date, as far as one of us being in a more than typical receptive mode and the other being in a more than typical crafting and hosting mode. And it was beautiful to feel that, because just like the planets are in this perfectly coordinated orbit between each other, the planets aren't running into each other and they're not glitching out and they're not having a grinding gear. But we hadn't quite figured that out. But with intentional practice, we got into a place where the orbit was flow and better than ever. And luckily, we'll be together to practice many birthdays from now forward.
And I just want to say a little bit about the birthday. I also received in that your energy was far more important to me than the actual doing or what you were doing. And so you have been in some health challenges and some need to be in a more restful place yourself. And so part of the issue with this Dsrx that we are bumping up against is, in many ways, the feminine state is naturally has very much a rest state that it thrives within. And so when you put both of us in that state, it becomes challenging. And how do you gently and softly be in this place of serving to me on that birthday, and not from this like harried, let's add stress to it, kind of Christmas, getting ready for Christmas kind of energy?
Yeah, our solution was to keep the schedule very simple.
Simplify, simple, and
Stay cozy.
stay cozy and be soft and just lean into the
Be
more
in
of just
pleasure.
being,
I
being
could
that.
host him in the devotional spaces that
Exactly.
are so natural for me.
Exactly. And
Instead of restaurant and event and
Right.
this and this, any sort of coordination wasn't going to feel true for us.
Even when the DoorDash on the birthday didn't quite work out, we were able to reframe it and take and laugh.
We laughed.
We do. And I think
We
we
were
have
so soft.
part of the DSRX method, or that we really both believe in, is that any setback, any issue, any problem is to reframe the setback and to see that, just like the planets, that they dance in this retrograde motion. We recognize that the apparent setbacks are truly, they're essential parts of the progress, and that we can't learn unless we have them. And what seems like failure is simply just a part of the natural tracing of the geometry of what it is to when you grow, and it's part of the cycle. And I think, to me, it's through those failing moments or those challenges or these retrograde experiences, that's actually where the relationship gets deepened. That's where I really feel the connection with you. It's when things go awry and I'm able to pivot and do something else, or stay cool and be cool in a situation. That's where you're like, oh. And so the DSRX, it's really just about focusing on practical methods. So what's the strategy? How do we strengthen these bonds with myself and with you? And how do I understand true intimacy, that it actually emerges when we are able to embrace the vulnerability, the emotional honesty of that moment? And it's wild, because as we were diving into this, I was realizing, God, this is so much like these ancient apothecaries and how they had this precise recipe with dosages, and they'd say, here's the tools and here's how you make the compound. You start to realize that it's just like with the relationship and how to make them more authentic, that there's actually a way to do this. And this word grafting comes into place.
Oh, good. Yeah. Yeah.
And we're taking a lot of things from the past, like feminism, for example, of really honoring women. And it's obvious that that's necessary, but how can we graft that progress and merge that with DS and create spaces that are sacred that really can hold the vulnerability for myself and for you? And the other word I think a lot about is integration. It's how do we bring things together in a harmonious way? And this is where the recipe comes in. And it's important for us to normalize RX moments as very essential medicine for growth. And it's in those moments that we help individuals. It's how I can help myself navigate my emotional landscapes and the intensity of my emotions with a precision, very much like these physicians, these apothecaries, and to see that the healing arts and these more esoteric ways actually can be translated into the relationship. And it ends up creating culture and a partnership that's based 100% on mutual understanding and 100% on respect and 100% on conscious care for each other. I remember listening to a book by Richard Rohr called The Wisdom Pattern while I was lifting weights and literally sitting down and being, oh my God, this is it. This is it. I remember coming home and being like, it's in this book. He's talking about Dsrx. He really is. It's what it is. And that pattern that he talks about in that book is that the pattern of wisdom throughout life is order, disorder, and reorder. And then it mapped perfectly on this Dsrx model. Mm-hmm. And in Masters of Change, as I read that later, he spoke a lot about the same concept with allostosis being the same idea. And then we move away from a paradigm of homeostasis to a paradigm of allostasis. And Terry Real speaks about the same thing, a relationship coach, when he says that relationships actually don't really begin until you've completely been let down by your partner and you're completely out of the honeymoon period and you have, he calls it normal marital hatred. But it's this period where you just actually just hate, like you're done and you're not in your fantasy anymore. And it moves from this deep illusion or delusion or fantasy into reality. And it's facing something much, much deeper.
Sometimes it's a crash.
It's a crash, exactly. And I've talked about.
We've had a few of those.
We've talked about the Stockdale paradox that states that it's facing the brutal facts and remaining optimistic. That's the key to this. And so the RX it's not like the RX is only there occasionally. We're always in a state of either D or S or RX. And it's a weaving, and the craft is being able to understand where we are in the moment and applying the right tools for the moment. And so there is a need to recognize that the disorder is necessary. And even though it feels like it's chaotic, if we can see that it's a disorder that will provide growth and look for the opportunities for growth, it's no longer chaotic. And it ceases to be as painful because you know that pain is serving something. It's like when you're lifting weights, you know that pain is serving something. It reframes the moment.
The dissolving.
Dissolving.
You're not solving.
Exactly.
You're not trying to get it to be something it isn't and really just accept what is.
And that goes back to surrendering, like you said. But most people get stuck there. And when they're in that state, they want to go backwards and fix it all and solve it all. And that you're just ending up back and forth from like an order that's the old order to a mess back to the old order. And Raplani speaks eloquently about submissives and dominance, has a beautiful insight about this stage. He says the key to moving through it is to stop wanting it to be right and to care more about the repair than about the winning.
Ooh.
And Terry Real echoes this as well when he says that when you're in a state of disconnection, all you should care about is repairing the relationship and never about being right. And as I think about being an RX, it's always about the repair with myself and then the repair with you. And so,
In that order.
right. And then I'm not able to repair with you until I repair myself. And so the evolution of the Dsrx, in summary, is really taking the best elements of the DS dynamic and evolving them into something that's much more sustainable and much more conscious.
So that it is played out in the natural experience of the everyday.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we're taking this movement from expectation into something that is more agreements, that those expectations are the unconscious and the unspoken. We've talked about
Cherished outcomes.
cherished outcomes. Who said that? Elizabeth Gilbert?
Right. She
Yeah.
was.
And so those expectations really become relationship killers, where a lot of our relationships are littered with the trash of the unexpected, unexpressed expectation.
Ohm has a quote about that I love. He says that relationships should be the carcass of your expectations. Isn't that that's so awesome? And the relationships are here to really kill us. That's what they are. Our experience in relationship is that it's about the dissolving of our egos and the dissolving of our expectations and the dissolving of any definition of what we should think and behave. We're just reporting it. When we talk about dominance or we talk about submission, it's much more accurate to say that we're just in an energy that works or doesn't work. And it's less about trying to fit into what that means or what we think it means.
But at the same time, having clarity and being explicit about the communication for our evolved self is imperative, because as a relationship is a container that we're agreeing not to come in and have the best time ever, but to really, we say die to the ego, but it is the ego, which is the person, the person, the entire identity of self. And to do that is no easy mission.
No, it's not.
And it also takes a simultaneous redefining of what you're becoming. So Eric's beautiful word of grafting is so apropos, where we are taking the best of what was part of an identity or a self or an ego or a model of relating, keeping what works for you and grafting it into the best new elements of what you're becoming. It's a very, very powerful way to evolve with intentionality, but also a lot of grace.
And I think big thing for me has been to dwell and live in a space of curiosity and to live with questions and to be okay that I can lead with questions. It's like, instead of being in a state of confusion or like a dissolving doubt, it's like when there's doubt or there's confusion, can I just be like, and be curious? And so I ask myself these questions. I think about this as Dsrx and moving forward with this. How do we really change and transform that dynamic of relationship from these rigid definitions and these rigid roles into something that's much more fluid and mutually supportive without losing the polarity or losing the sort of spice and intensity that we love about the traditional roles? And how do we also embrace these challenges? Because that's actually how we grow and how we gain resiliency and create these resilient partnerships that kind of dance with life. I've found that you're an incredible chef, and so you're like an ancient mystic wizard. It's just like the ancient apothecary, mixing the precise ways of doing things. You see the metric, the framework of relationships like others see a recipe. And I've learned so much from just watching your awareness and seeing this. But you are so feminine and so surrendered in this that you haven't really experienced what I've experienced in my place. And so what I've come through is to see that there are these tools and that there are these methods for dealing with these moments that have been so transformative. And then I've started inventorying those tools, and I've started to realize and accept the time when I get inflamed or I'm off. I just am like, oh shit, here's a disorder. Here's a moment. And instead of letting it just derail us, I come back and I always know, I'm like, good, there's going to be something that I'm going to learn from this. And I tell my kids, an 18-year-old, 16-year-old, and I said to them, anytime they have something tough that happens to them, I said, good, it's good for you. And they laugh at me, they kind of make fun of me a little bit because I'm always like, oh, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say it's good for me. And it's true. And so just because you're going through something that's really tough, like grief or an illness or aging, all things that we've been dealing with, it doesn't mean it's the end of your sex life. It doesn't mean it's the end of your romance or your connection or your love. In many ways, it's actually the beginning. It's actually where the true intimacy can happen. It's actually where you start dissolving these patterns and these frameworks and these things that are actually not even true and they're lies. And we have to become more honest with ourselves. And we have to have valor. We have to have courage to really know what it is that we like and where we fit in these realms. And maybe we're not only here, and maybe we dance back and forth in different places. And so it demands a lot of vulnerability. And I think one of the big things that Andrew and I used to talk about, and we bring to you as well, and you really liked, is stop being a sub to this culture. Most people are submissive to the culture.
Not just the feminists.
No,
All of us.
all of us, many men, you're just subs. You're subs to the programming that's out there. And you have to take inventory and you have to find yourself and listen to yourself. And this applies to everyone. And it's definitely been a journey for me, a deconditioning. And part of that is really embracing a devotion and a service and a softness and rest and a gentleness without losing my edge, actually increasing my capacity to be more resilient.
And then I think that that really brings up in the rest periods or in the slowdown massive amounts of discomfort that ultimately one of the foundational practices that I think all humans are here to practice is how to be ever increasingly with our discomfort. We can say that we're befriending it. Sometimes that's accessible, but ultimately, can we be with it? That it's really not easy to be in any kind of RX period, that there's grief present. In fact, as we look at the many, many, many ways that love can be expressed or devotion or all these things that we're saying, there are so many ways that grief is ever present inside of our world, that we're grieving. And Eric and I have had so many layers of the grief of the loss of many layers of illusions, the grief of who we thought we were, or what we thought our relationship was going to look like, where we live, or how even just the afternoon goes, or how even this particular podcast is going to go. Just getting to this location was a journey, and one that we're so graceful at now because we're not resisting the discomfort or the grief or the frustration. In fact, it becomes playful. How
it's adventurous.
That's adventurous. But this Dsrx model for us is something that we can hold ourselves in the guidance and the trust, kind of leaning into a container that hosts us both in a transformative period, which, by the way, happens many times per day. It is Eric who helps us transition. It is me who softens into his leadership there. But ultimately, Eric is responding so gracefully with devotion, with service, with discipline, with grace, with softness to the extenuating circumstances of the uncontrollables out there. So this support that we offer inside of a guidance sense or a mentorship sense comes so naturally in a way that there are tools that can be here for these relationship transitions, for conscious growth as individuals, and also keeping an ever-present eye on the sacred third entity that is our love, our relationship, this thing that we are hosting, both of us, and participating in, placing our deposits and our dosage and our really, dare I say, a sacred recipe that comes in that is so unique to us, but also many universal pieces that we encourage people to really find their own recipe for themselves. And that's where these pieces of coaching or workshops or resources become invaluable to tap in. But ultimately, we have found having someone to talk to is everything. We have each other, but it's grindy. And we love to share and teach and offer ways that we can make this more easeful for others by sharing what we've learned.
Before we bring this to a close, I want to state super clear, very clear, that Dsrx is a practice. It is a craft. And that being in a relationship, any type of relationship, and especially a romantic relationship, and especially a relationship of any type of tension or polarity, is a craft. And one of the principles that I live by is to respect the craft. And this means don't expect to be perfect. Keep showing up, keep improving, keep learning, keep working on it. This is not about performing a flawless, perfect dynamic or checking all the boxes. This is just like any craft. It's living, it's real, it's raw, and you're alive to the moment and you're in it, and it's an art as much as it is a science. It's something that you build slowly and you commit to day by day with presence, with humility, with consciousness, and with full commitment. The goal isn't to master it and be done with it, but the goal is actually to keep doing it and to stay in it, stay committed, and to keep refining. That's the devotion. You're devoted to the craft of relationship, the craft of Dsrx, and the discipline is in the devotion.
Yeah, it's so important to remember that it's not something to do, but it's something much more to feel into. It's not something to get right, but something to really return to. And any of the moments where we get wonky or things get tangled or crisscross or zigzag, as I like to say, we know how to come gently back into these spaces. Dsrx is a principle that's alive. It breathes with our life, our nervous system, our emotions, our circumstances, our travel, our family, and our health or hormone. It's really that it's all part of shaping the dynamic, and the work is really staying attuned to that. And that both of us have a responsibility to attune. Mine is more to really experience and express, right? To observe and report from a place of my devotional stance. And that it really is my service to Eric, is to be consistently in that place of observation and report. And what he does with that information is really how he brings a devotional stance with deep discipline to our life. That this really is not a place we arrive to, that just like any other piece, there is no perfection, but there is a place where we can practice and practice. There is no end, that there is graciousness and forgiveness and a willingness ultimately for us to meet each other and learn from each other and care for each other, tend and really worship. We're obsessed with each other. We love playing here.
And it's a tending. I love that word, tending.
Yeah.
And it's exactly what you said about not being perfect. And the flame is much more of a tending. If you have a fire, you can keep the fire going all the time, but you can't keep the fire going all the time if you don't tend it. It's either going to burn down the house or it's going to go out. But if you want to keep it at its right pace, it needs to be tended. And when you're able to tend it, then that fire becomes something that's amazing, because it starts popping up and being of service to others and to other things and to your own life and to your own sensibilities. And it's crazy because all those things that you had to leave behind, they all start happening again, but this time they're real and they're not just fantasies. And that's when it becomes this art, the art that is born out of respecting the craft. And so here at Dsrx Studio and Conscious Dominance, we're very much, Rachael and I, creating, as artists and as relationship coaches, we're creating a modern relationship where we are able to graft and meet contemporary needs with ancient wisdom, and where we're able to allow rest to become something that's much more important, and to hold these paradoxes that vulnerability can become strength, that rest can become a revolution, and that when you're reflecting, that can bring you into your power. And I love all of it. And I'm excited to continue being curious and exploring these concepts with you and have you here with me and to be on this journey.
If what you hear in this podcast resonates, we offer complimentary 45-minute introductory calls where you can meet with me solo, meet with Eric solo, or meet with us together. And you can find the link for that in the episode descriptions.
And I appreciate everyone for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.